All I know is all my haters become my waiters when I sit down at the table of success. When does the hard part start? Because it's not hard for me. I love every moment being the mayor. I just like rats. And I am so happy I have a 4-star general who's working on finally winning the war on rats. Welcome to our trash revolution. I can't separate my belief because I'm an elected official. When I walk with God. When a mayor has swagger, the city has swagger.
Welcome back to Inside City Hall. That was just a very small sampling of some memorable moments and quotes and initiatives from Mayor Adams' time in office, which is now winding down. Just 2.5 months left in Eric Adams' first and only term as mayor. And my next guest enjoyed a unique relationship with the mayor. Tom Allon is a longtime local media executive and civic leader. He is the publisher of City and State New York and was a candidate for mayor back in 2013. Welcome back to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here.
So I mentioned your relationship with the mayor. A lot of people may not know. You sort of trained him for the job starting back in what, 2019?
Early 2019.
So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I bragged about it for a while. It was not so much lately. So Eric and I had breakfast in late 2018. I actually, a couple days before that, I had mentioned to my wife that I was thinking of running for mayor again, and she said, "Come on, you're not going to run. Why don't you find somebody that you can advise?" And she was smart. And I coincidentally had breakfast with Eric a couple days later, and he said to me, "You ran for mayor. What should I do?" And I said, "Listen, you're well known in Brooklyn, but you're probably not that well known in Manhattan. You need to get the chattering classes talking about you, and also you need to bone up on policy ideas." He's like, "Well, can you help me do that?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And so I came up with the idea of mayor's school, which is a little bit derivative of something that was done during the Giuliani administration by Jennifer Rabb. He had classes every Friday, bringing in policy experts. And so we did that for 2 years. We did about 70 of them in person at this diner in Brooklyn Heights where Eric hung out. It just closed down a couple weeks ago. But it happened to be the diner right behind my building where I lived. So it was convenient. So we had, I invited Dick Ravitch, Kathy Wild, Gifford Miller, a lot of really smart New Yorkers. And every week we had breakfast and we talked for about an hour and a half about policy ideas.
So you wrote an opinion piece a couple weeks ago in City and State. I believe we have the headline to show. You called it, it was the Adams administration autopsy report. And you talked about some of the mistakes that Adams made that sunk his mayoralty. There was some advice that he didn't take, right? Including the people that he installed in positions of power in his administration.
Yeah, I mean, Eric talked a lot during the campaign and in those mayor breakfasts about the dysfunction of government and how he was going to fix that. And unfortunately, he didn't listen to advice like people like Dan Doctoroff telling him that he should have very few deputy mayors, every commissioner should report your deputy mayor, there should be no senior advisors that have no portfolio. He just ignored all of it. And I also said to him on a number of occasions, do what Bloomberg did, find the best and the brightest, not people you're comfortable with, not people you worked with before. And I think half the people he brought in were the best and the brightest, people like Dan Gorodnick and Andrew Kimball and Maria Torres Springer. But there were a lot of people he brought in who were cronies, who were people he felt comfortable with, who really were unqualified to be in the roles that they were in. And unfortunately, those people too, had some ethical lapses.
Well, I was going to say, you wrote that you wish you had scheduled more classes on ethics and management. I mean, what was it with Adams in terms of ethics? What was the blind spot that he had?
I think, everything that happened that he did, I always said was petty, but it was crossing the line occasionally. And so I think, Eric thought he was invulnerable, which happens to many people when they become powerful. And I think he thought the stuff that he was doing was fine, that nobody should bother him about it. And I think he trusted the people around him. Listen, Ed Koch in his third term had a similar problem, that he trusted people around him, and there was corruption left and right in his third term that blew up Ed Koch's third term.
So talk a little bit about his legacy. I know you wrote about this in the piece. I mean, I think right now he's so closely associated with the federal indictment and all these corruption scandals. Do you think history will remember him more kindly?
I think history will be kinder to him than the present has been. I mean, I think he will have some real legacies. I think he steadied a city when the city was in trouble. Listen, remember what was handed off to him by Bill de Blasio. It was a city that was really, a wreck after COVID. He calmed things down. He brought crime down. He then was handed another crisis, a migrant crisis, which he handled reasonably adeptly. I mean, he made some missteps, putting tents and flood zones and stuff like that. But and then education, I think, is a big game changer that he and David Banks did was changing the failed literacy program from 30 years of whole language back to phonics. Scores are already up, and I think in 5 or 10 years we're going to see a big change from that. Containerization was a smart thing to do. I mean, unlike de Blasio, who had one big home run in year 1, which was universal pre-K, Eric had a number of singles in his 4 years, and people may not remember the singles as much as they remember the home run, because whenever you mention de Blasio, they go, oh, universal pre-K, and then I'm like, what else did he do? And like, not so much.
So let me ask you about Zoran Mamdani. Maybe this is premature, but he certainly seems on his way to winning this election. He's certainly the overwhelming favorite. I don't know if he's been taking mayor classes from somebody like you, but do you think that he's prepared for the job of mayor?
So I haven't given him mayor classes, although a couple people had asked me if I would be willing to do that. I think he's been very smart, and I think he's gone on a listening tour similar to what Eric did. And I'm sure he has people around him that are smart enough to set up with the right people. He met with Mike Bloomberg. He's met with a number of first deputy mayors, I understand. I think he's a very smart guy. He's somebody who does his homework, who's going to, he's surrounded by people. I've been very impressed by El Biscard Church. I've been very impressed by Morris Katz, 26-year-old wunderkind, who helped run his campaign. I think he's going to hire really good people, and 80% of being a successful mayor is putting the right people in place. And Zoran, I don't think, is the kind of person who's going to be intimidated by people who are smarter than him or have more experience than him.
You ran for mayor in 2013.
Yep.
Not terribly successfully.
Nope.
But what was that experience like? I mean, now looking back, with the benefit of hindsight, what were some of the lessons learned?
It was a great experience, and it was something I'd never intended to do, but I had a passion for education, and I thought I had something to say about education, and I think I did, and I think some of my ideas filtered out then and are still in the conversation about specialized high schools, gifted intelligent education, vocational high schools. It's very hard as an outsider, and very hard as somebody who's not wealthy to run for such a big office, especially your first go-around. And I was labeled a long shot from day one. I actually wrote a proposal for a book about a year ago called The Long Shot, because it exposed how difficult it is to run for office in America, and especially a city like New York, when you're not Mike Bloomberg with billions of dollars for the first time. And that made it very difficult for me to fundraise. It made it very difficult for me to, but still, I think I was in the race for 18 months. I was in many debates with Bill de Blasio and Christine Quinn and others. I think the press took me seriously to a certain extent. And I learned a lot about the city and about myself. I thought I was going to be a very good fundraiser, and I wasn't. I didn't know that I was as good a debater as I was.
That's me and you, by the way. There's some video of us from 2013.
Yeah.
And you weren't an elected official. I mean, you see some of that video, and it's John Liu and Bill de Blasio and Christine Quinn. I mean, you're at a disadvantage if you don't have experience in elected office.
Absolutely. And it's funny, and at the debates, what I realized very quickly, especially when there was one debate that Errol moderated, and there was no time constraints in that debate. And I remember it was a church in East New York, and it was housing was the issue. And I clearly was I didn't have as deep knowledge as the other people there. So I decided that every time it was my turn to speak, I was going to try to say something somewhat memorable and witty. And I remember Bill de Blasio turned to me at one point and said, "Hey, dude, where are you coming up with these lines?" And I said, "Bill, brevity is the soul of wit, and you could learn it."
Well, our time is up, but Tom Allon, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks.